So maybe a week ago, I made a tweet about redoing like the tier list of speedrun levels that I made, where instead of just putting each of the levels onto tiers, instead I made like a what's called a radar chart where it uses 5 different components of each level and ranks them on a scale from 1 to 5 on that. I made like an actual ranking of the levels based off of their point totals in that. There are 30 levels technically in Jet Force Gemini. If you count each zone on a planet as a level. So for instance, Goldwood has 4 levels within it. Rith Essa has 4. Whereas like some even large levels like Sekhmet only have 1. The way that it works is there are 5 different things that I ranked each level on, starting with the environment at the top. So this is the way a level looks, whether the aesthetics of the level match the general theme of whatever I think the level is going for, as well as just the overall look and feel of everything going on in the level. The music is not only just the quality of the soundtrack, but also how it fits everything else in the level. The difficulty is how challenging it is to speedrun well. And I took into consideration whether or not the difficulty is due to it actually being challenging, or if it's just due to RNG or jank or things that are out of the player's control. Pacing is also related to speedruns, where if there's large segments of the level that don't have anything going on, or if it's just a running simulator where you don't even need to shoot anything, or mostly just a hub area, then the pacing is bad. If there's a lot of things engaging you throughout the entire level, then the pacing is really good. And the last component is the one that's the most broad. It is, I couldn't come up with a really good name for it. I settled on design, but I was also thinking layout or features. This broader category relates to what does the level have that others don't that might set it apart and make it more interesting? Is the level enjoyable to play? And is the level structured in a way that is engaging and challenging for a speedrun? So I'll go through these individually, starting with rank 30, going all the way to rank number 1, and then at the very end I made a chart or a graph that has all of them so that you can see generally where things rank. So the first one, as you've been observing, is Goldwood Outset. So this is the very first level in the game. Every character does have to go through this level. It ranks super low because there's really not much going on. The environment is on Goldwood, and it's just kind of foresty settlement beginner level. There's not a whole lot going on, so it has a 2 there. The Goldwood music fits the level. It's just not very appealing because there's not really anything to it. It's just the drum beat. The difficulty is as low as it gets because it's just shooting 1 sniper drone, and that's pretty much it. The hardest part is the death warp and managing your health with that. Or, I don't know, maybe shooting the sniper drone's harder than that, considering how often I miss it. But the pacing is a 2, mostly because there's not a whole lot going on. But the death warp speeds things up, and it's a level that you can breeze through pretty quickly. And for the design, it also gets a 2, just because there's not really a whole lot going on. It's a starter zone. There is the fish food pond and the shuriken cave at the start of it, but you don't use either of those in any percent, so I didn't really take them into that much consideration. So the design also gets a 2. So this adds up to a 2, 3, 4, 6, 8 is the lowest, and a 5 is the lowest possible. All right, so next one is, if these go in the right order, yeah, Asteroid. So we go from the very end, or the very beginning of the game, to the very end. Asteroid, for being the last level in the game, sucks. It's not a final gauntlet of enemies, really. It's not particularly challenging. There's not really that many enemies even to speak of. So for it being the last stronghold that you have to clear, there's just not a whole lot to it. I do like the environment of it, in that you are having to like walk around on an actual asteroid. The level also is part of the design of it that might have given it some points, but mostly just broke the tie between it and Goldwood Outset, I believe, because I think they're both 8 points total. 1, 2, 5, 7, 9. Oh, this one's worth 9. But the way that the level is laid out is that it kind of wraps around itself, and I think that that's an interesting feature, mostly because it is almost able to be sequence broken, but not quite. The music is fairly generic. There's not a whole lot of difficulty to it. It's mostly just remembering when you need to jump immediately out of one of the doors so that you don't run off the platform, which loses like 5 seconds. The pacing, it's just short and there's not really anything going on, and the design's pretty lackluster. So Asteroid is ranked number 29 out of 30. Really bad for a last level. Third from the bottom is Abandoned Space Station, which is also, the level title was Wreck in the Japanese version. It's just called UFO. I really like the environment, but that's about all this level has going for it. It is unfinished, just outright. Like, you can tell because there's nothing on the level other than tribals, and once you get to the end of it, it's just an empty door. So it's unfinished, and so it doesn't really get a whole lot of points. But I like the way that the level makes a player feel, I guess, the atmosphere of it. But that's about it. That's the only thing that got points for this level, making it relatively towards the bottom. Next one is the first part of Tawfret. This includes the area where you land in that first general open area with the 4 zombie drones, the life force door with the tribals, and the area with Jeff and the catacombs. I think that the environment of Tawfret overall is interesting. The music isn't great, but it fits. Fun trivia fact, Tawfret was like one of the first tracks composed for the game. There's no difficulty, pacing, or design elements of it that are outstanding or noteworthy. So it's pretty much just carried by the look and feel of the level itself. Number 26 is Gem Quarry. So this level is the bane of this, or it's part of a gauntlet towards the end of an any percent run that are the bane of that run's existence. It's gotten over time, or at least I've gotten more consistent at it, and the strategies that we've been using have led us to be more consistent with it. But outside of its difficulty in doing it quickly, there's not much to it. The music, I believe, is the same as Goldwood's. The environment is interesting in that it's like a separate planet where they're harvesting gems. The design of it is relatively unique in that it's centered around a mini game of shooting gems into the machine. Is irritating as that mini game itself actually is, and the pacing is bleh, because it's a long cutscene, which is kind of nice towards the end of a speedrun that's 3.5 hours long because you get a restroom break, but outside of that, you're just standing there shooting gems. Let's get into some actual levels. I say that, and then we go to Walkway, which is one of the other hidden quote unquote planets. I think the environment of it is cool. It has a super, not drastic, but it has a huge lens flare in the background that is fun to mess with, where you can reorient the camera to where the lens flare is constantly going back and forth. It doesn't really have any music aside from the sounding like you're in a dial-up modem, where it's just playing random like beep noises, and then when you're riding the elevator up, it plays the Rith Essa theme for all of 3 seconds. It's not difficult. The pacing isn't a 1 just because it knows that it's a hidden short level and just gets out of the way. I like the design of it, and that it's just this singular room with a basement that you unlock later on in the game, depending on when you first access the level. It has some cool features, but it's just not a complete feeling level. And number 24, I think we're just getting all of the hidden planets out of the way, because the next one is Water Ruin, which is a cool place in the game, but that's it. I like the environment. I like the music. I think that it fits Water Ruin more than it fits the mine on Rith Essa. But outside of it being like a screensaver type of level, everything else is a 1. It's not difficult. It feels like a waste of time going there. And the design doesn't really have, like, there's just nothing on the level. It's just collecting tribals, a spaceship part underneath the island, and talking to the bear. I can't remember its name. For some reason I always think it's Bubbles, but I'm pretty sure that's not it. So you actually get 2 spaceship parts on this level, and considering the fact that it's one of the smallest ones, and you get, was it 2 out of 14 parts? So a 7th. It's like almost 15%, like 14% of the spaceship parts. It's ridiculous. Anyway, Goldwood Interior. So this is the actual first part of Goldwood that you really get to play. I don't include the hub area, which is where you get the red key and the machine gun. The level itself starts after you go through the door that you unlock with the machine gun. The pacing of it is actually relatively fine, in that most of the rooms you are actually having to do something. It's just that most of what you're doing is pretty straightforward, and you're not really actually having to focus on what you're doing, which is why the difficulty is low. The design is kind of cool. I mean, it's just more than nothing. And the environment and music, similar to Goldwood Outset, are pretty low. But this is one of the first actual levels to be included on the list at 23. 22 is Palace Flume. I like the palace environment. I like how you're swimming throughout its flume. I don't know what the water there is supposed to serve as, but it's interesting. I think that the music fits. The design is cool with the maze, but the pacing and the difficulty, like, you're just swimming and running pretty much in straight lines throughout the whole thing. So not a whole lot to redeem it beyond how the level sounds and the way that it looks. And after the Flume, the last one in this batch is Anubis Passageway, which is a really cool concept for a level that is executed as poorly as possible. The level is just filling up your jetpack, hovering across a long passageway, and then running through another one, jetpacking up to a platform to save some tribals, and then running to get a spaceship part, and then hovering using your jetpack all the way back. I really like the environment and music on Anubis, but this level is just really boring to play through, and is part of where the speedrun, you can tell like how the transition from the levels before Mizar 1 to the parts after Mizar 1, it really drops in quality, I guess, in terms of how enjoyable the levels are, in that this is one of the first parts after Mizar 1 and is really low despite being incredibly long. Moving on from Anubis Passageway, is Depository, which is just 1 point better in the pacing. I think that the idea for the level was still really cool, with you navigating a maze of these supply crates, similar to how the idea for Passageway is hovering through kind of the outside of the level. It's just that you don't actually have to do anything throughout the entire level. It's just navigating the maze, which is mostly just like there's not really any dead ends so much as it's just a labyrinth where you kind of navigate the entire room in a snake-like arrangement. You can do a pressure jump to get over part of the level to skip it, but I don't do that personally because I can't do it consistent enough to save time. But aside from the environment and music, this level is just barely above the other mediocre Anubis level. But after Depository is Juno's portion of Mizar's Palace, which I think is just a stronger part of the palace than the Flume, which is the swimming portion. I don't include the palace race in any of these just because that's technically part of a hub area and any character can access it. So otherwise I would include the palace race here and probably boost this up a little bit. But you don't really have to clear any life force doors. Like, you don't have to worry about enemies here. It's just navigating around the level to get the tribals and the maze in the basement area, which again is mostly just going to each room as you reach it versus actually having to navigate a maze. So the design I think is better than Flume, which was lacking in some of those areas, but still fairly mediocre. Tawfret Bridge is the exact same components on a completely different environment. I really like Tawfret as just a level theme, and I think that the village area of this level is interesting, but again, you only have to clear one life force door. The rest of it is just running, collecting robot pieces or robot parts to put Void together. There's next to no difficulty, but it's a cool place to explore. So after Tawfret Bridge is Spawnship, which going into this I would have expected this to be higher up, but I think this being around the midpoint, most of the levels after this one are fairly like complete feeling. I think that Spawnship is a cool idea in that it's like the carrier for all of the enemies, but the level itself is labyrinthine. It is a giant maze to navigate if you don't know where you're going, with each character doing something a little bit different on it. The main drawback for actually playing through it is that you don't have to do a lot. It's just running through different rooms. And I don't think that they do a whole lot with the environment and the way that the level looks, beyond everything being blue and spaceship. And the music doesn't really carry it all that much either. So last one in this category is a level that is completely carried by its atmosphere and environment and music compared to what you're actually doing in the level, because Essa Mine is a very long segment of doing mostly just hallway running. It's a really cool idea for a level. The multiplayer version of it is really fun. The music is really nice, but it just goes on and on and on. It has like it's one of the levels with the most tribals in it, and you don't have to do a single thing to actually save them. They're just waiting for you to go pick them up. So this is the halfway point. All the ones after Essa Mine are at least decent levels. So this one, this was probably the hardest level to rank, and the hardest one for me to cope, I guess, with where it ended up being placed, because if I were just listing off levels that I enjoyed the most, or if I were just subjectively ranking them, I guess, without following any sort of procedures, Cortex would be much lower. But the music fits. It's a cool enough environment. It involves a incredibly difficult, at least for me, jump, which makes up the bulk of the actual level. The pacing is terrible because the level is mostly just getting to the room with the brain, doing the jump, and then leaving. And then the design, beyond it being interesting to run around in the brain of a worm, that's about it. But I think that I would have put the difficulty even higher, but I think that giving it a 5 in that area, it's just not... The difficulty is too out of the player's control in some regards. It just feels really inconsistent. So Essa Interior, despite being another hallway simulator, is pretty high ranking just because the environment and music carry it almost completely, because it's you just running through the level without really doing anything, unless you do the skip where you jump up on the boxes to get onto the bridge, which I haven't fully mastered enough to do in runs, but even with that, there's not really any inherent difficulty in it because you're not doing anything. The pacing, mostly saved by the fact that it's short, and the design isn't a 1 just because I like levels that wrap around themselves. But I think that this is the best feeling part of Essa as far as the effectiveness of the music and the environment. I think that this is the only Essa level that has 5s in both of these, just because it feels like everything clicks best here, which is unfortunate because it's a nothing of a level. And the last Mizar's Palace level is Lupus's, which is Chasm. The environment's cool. You get to run through a portion with night vision, which helps the design because it's a unique feature, as well as the portions where you're hovering around. You actually do something in Chasm, which helps the pacing and the difficulty versus just running in straight lines. And the music has been the same throughout all of them. Chasm just is by far the best Mizar's Palace level. With lobby, if you actually had to fight stuff, would help it, but I think that Chasm has more flavor to it, I guess, that helps it as well. Rith Essa Ascent, which is the grenade funnel area where you run up a kind of cliff face and then down a spiral chamber, hover across some cliffs, and then run up a spiral chamber and somehow appear back at the entrance of the level. It's relatively short, which affects the pacing. It's an interesting layout and design. The grenade funnel kind of sucks in that you have to be wary of a bunch of tribals at the bottom of a funnel shape with drones that are likely to surrender or just randomly throw grenades, which can end a run very late in the actual speed run because it happens at like 2.5 hours, 2 hours and 40 minutes into the run. But it's a decent level. And then Ichor Perimeter fits the exact same shape as Rith Essa Ascent. Everything is decent, or I guess mediocre. Like 2 would be a mediocre, 3 is decent. Everything is okay about the level. You only really have to clear enemies at the very start with the sniper section, which is a cool idea. But other than that, you're just running in like a big loop shape to get to the fun club, which is why the music is so high, because the fun club has some of the best music in the game and has tracks that the DJ can play that, unless you take the time to actually stop and talk to him, you wouldn't even know are in the game. Because he has like 5 different tracks, I think. So actual good levels. Sekhmet Battle Cruiser, super long level, segments where you don't do anything, but there's a lot of areas to explore. In 100% every character goes there, but in any percent it's just Vela twice and Juno, who actually does the full level. The environment and music are good. There's not a whole lot of difficulty to it, aside from 1 or 2 rooms that can be a challenge to do well. The pacing is kind of peaks and valleys of interesting stuff, and the overall level design is pretty good, apart from some areas that are just boring to navigate. But overall, decent level. Goldwood Rim is number 9. Aside from having to deal with a lot of tribals that can arbitrarily die, the level is okay. The music and environment are meh, but the design of the level and how it kind of wraps around itself, you go from indoors in the caves to like outside onto the actual rim, is cool. There's a lot of enemies that you have to deal with. Part of the difficulty is making sure that you don't lose tribals, because tribals die here probably more than anywhere else in the game. The pacing is pretty good. Most of the parts of the level, you're actually doing something versus just strafe. I guess like drifting because you're in the tank. just kind of strafing around empty rooms or not having to worry about enemies. But it's a decent level. It does get a bad rap because of the tribals there. Number 8 is the introductory area to Eschebone, which goes all the way up to just past the room with the rhino drones up on the bridge towards the ceiling. So you have to do all the outside parts, and then the part of the level where you are kind of running down a long hallway killing rhino drones and a couple packs of flying drones, and then the part where you're running down the open chamber with the bridge and the rhino drones on top, which can be most of the different aspects of the level can be challenging to do well. It's relatively decently paced in that it kind of starts slow and builds up. It's just kind of ends suddenly, and then you move on to the next part, mostly because they needed a hub area to start Cortex, and then they decided to put it, I guess, where they did. The music is one of my favorites. The environment is really cool. Going into the worm is an interesting concept. So everything is decent with a couple exceptional areas. Number 7 is a mirror of, I guess it wouldn't be a mirror, it's an exact copy of the approach on Eschebone. All the qualities are ranked the same. However, not necessarily for the same reasons. It can be relatively difficult doing the part where you're coming back as Vela to rescue the tribals, because the drones, the soldier drones especially, run all over the place and blend in with the environment a lot. And for whatever reason, there's almost no lag or dropped frame rates, so they run super fast. I like the pacing of parts of the level, but just running along the cliff face, not doing anything, is relatively boring. And I like the way that it looks, so the design and environment get a couple points. And then Anubis Hold is one of my favorite levels to speedrun. I think that the difficulty and pacing are almost as good as they can be. I think that it just needs a little bit more to it. One more kind of challenging room would push both of these all the way up. The music, environment, and design are all good, but not spectacular. So overall, good/great level, just nothing truly outstanding. If Cerulean were split into separate levels, the latter half level would be almost perfect. The level over, or the planet overall, because it's all one level, is dragged down by the nothing portion that you do for most of the beginning of it, because you're just running across a field one way, and then you run across a field going another way, and then you run back, and then you have to run all the way, the full length of the field, to get to the interesting parts of the level. But once you get the tri-rockets and get into the interior portion of the level, it's some of the best parts in the game. So these 3 parts are weighed down mostly by the introductory area and are averaged out by how good the latter half of the level is. Number 4 is Tawfret Castle, which has an amazing environment. I really like the lead up to the castle, because it's just an abandoned zombie planet, and then there's this seemingly abandoned stronghold fortress at the end of the level, or at the end of the planet, after you've gone through the whole thing. The layout of it is interesting. I like the way that it looks. I love how it actually feels like the lead up to a boss, where actually I think the lead up to each boss is pretty much in the top 5 for each of the 3 before Mizar 1. The only thing that really drags down Castle is the music, in that part of me likes the fact that it's just the same music as the rest of the level for the most part. However, I wish that there were a little bit more like oomph behind it, like an extra something added to the track for the end of the planet, but like something to make it a little bit more ominous or intimidating sounding. But there's not. It's a little bit short, which affects the other categories, just because it being only like 4 rooms that you have to clear before the boss affects the pacing. It affects the design because there's not a whole lot going on, and it makes it not the perfect like Goldilocks zone of challenging, but one of my favorites. Goldwood Lodge is also in a similar position, just a little bit better in some regards. I wish that it had more music behind it to make it feel like an in-game area. I like the environment in that it's like a darker, more mysterious, more ominous part of the introductory level. I think that it's designed really well, just because they throw in a lot of in-game enemies. It's one of the few areas where casual players can really run into trouble with just normal enemies in a level versus dying in boss fights. I think that the pacing and the difficulty of it are about as good as the game gets. It has like the right amount of rooms that you have to clear, and that you have to do like 2 large ones and then 2 smaller ones with flying drones. There's a lot of stuff that you have to go through, and the level's really densely packed. Very, very good level. And after that is the lead up to Vela's boss, which is Ichor Military Base. Doesn't have a lot of crazy standout features, but just has a lot of good consistency. Most of the rooms you actually have to clear out enemies. There's some of the only difficult platforming sections on this level. The actual like lead up to the boss area is cool from a like the way that the player perceives it, and that you're actually like running up to the final zone that's separate from all the others in the exterior of the base. I think that the music just isn't quite there, but the level would have to be perfect to be my number 1, because I think that Eschebone Thorax, both with Lupus and to a slightly lesser extent with Vela, just because she has to do the swimming portions, but especially with Lupus, is the perfect level in the speedrun. If you're going to weight everything based off of what's in the game versus what you could possibly like come up with on your own. If you're going to have a perfect level, this is it. The environment is really cool. The music fits it. There's just a constant build up, a crescendo, and it feels like the stakes are just getting higher and higher as you progress through the level. It is actually one of the more difficult ones, in that to play through quickly, you need to know when and where to restock on ammo. which enemies to use which type of guns on. You can't just breeze through the level without thinking about what gun you're using and what your ammo count is for a lot of your different weapons. It's paced really well. There's enemies that you have to clear in just about every room, and there's a lot of enemies of different types. I like the way that it's designed in that you see your destination almost immediately, but you have to figure out how to get there, or how to pass the obstacle of getting the magenta key, which you get at the very end of navigating in a large loop. And then once you have it, you just come back to the beginning of the level and go straight through the door to the exit. Also has the best boss in the game. However, that's not necessarily a factor. But overall, I think that this is the most entertaining level to play casually and to speedrun. So I ranked them 30 over here, number 1 over here. The lowest score that you can get technically is a 5 if you get 1s on everything, and then a 25 is perfect. Thorax is 4 points higher than Ichor Military Base, 5 points higher than Lodge, and then the other 2 in the top 5 are at 19, several at 18, 16, several at 15, several at 12, a couple at 10 and 11, and then a bunch of 9s, and then Goldwood Outset at the very bottom at an 8. You can also see which category weighed the most or helped the most for each one. It seems like all the ones that are carried by their soundtrack are like in this area, and then the difficulty and design and pacing, especially the difficulty and design over everything else, seem to become huge in this section, whereas they're mostly 1s on this side. So that is my rankings. I'll make the VOD, like I'll save the VOD and make it to where you can check it out, and I'll save all the images and post them somewhere. I don't know. If you want to look at each one individually without having to walk through a video. But yeah, hope that y'all enjoyed this as content, and obviously everybody agrees with me because I'm right. You can't disagree with facts as much as you might try. But yeah, it's pretty obvious that the levels where you actually do stuff and fight enemies picks up at a certain point, and that there's a lot of filler levels that are on the list just because they're in the game. Like, it doesn't really start until maybe like top 13 or 14. Hope y'all enjoyed. I am going to get some rest in preparation for my semester starting